I'm Eric Knopfsinger. I'm Chief Creative Officer at High Voltage Software, at Keyword Studios. And I'm joined today on stage by this illustrious and expert industry panel. That's these guys, to discuss a topic of global mobility. Essentially, multinational companies relocating resources to new geographic locations. Joining me on stage are Janine Faulkner, she's president of Technicolor Games, Dan Prigg, who is EVP and head of studio at Skydance Interactive, Ninel Anderson, who is CEO of Devoted Studios, sorry, and Mark Henry, who is a director and operations and strategy of Create Electronic Arts. I probably butchered all of that, so I'm sorry.
So, that's good.
Yeah, so it'll be a pretty casual conversation, but I think likely a good place to start is just sort of framing what it is we exactly mean by global mobility. In a nutshell, global mobility is simply the process by which companies are relocating employees from country to country. Now, multinational companies are strategically deploying assets and resources all throughout the world for different competitive advantages. But there's not really a blueprint for that right now on how to do this and how we go about approaching this. So I guess the first thing I'm curious about is how do companies go about building a structure for global mobility?
Yeah, I think the structure really has to first come from company culture, right? There has to be this desire within the company that this is something that they want to do. And of course, HR is involved more for the implementation, really the tactical pieces. Once the company's decided this is the direction they want to go in. During the pandemic, I think all the businesses were really driving this just to hire people, hire the talent they needed during the war for talent, to get those people wherever they could. That I think HR and some companies, they're still catching up and realizing, okay, well, there's maybe not everyone can do that if you're working on content that's someone else's, and they don't allow that because it's in the contract. You can reassign them to a different project, or you actually can't move to a place where there is no payroll. So there's certain parameters that I think HR needs to be on top of. But I think it's about the business really deciding this is what they want to do. And when you look at the number one factor job candidates are looking at right now, according to Kinsey, what do you think it is? Number one factor in terms of choosing a job? Flexibility, right? And so that's where I think the remote work really comes in. People want flexibility over their schedules in a way that they hadn't really had until the pandemic.
Absolutely, absolutely.
There's a lot of pieces to build in, though, because when you have people moving around, if they're not communicating about that, like during a pandemic, there are tax implications and legal implications. How do you get to the technology they need and things like that?
Yeah, well, and I mean, to that point, I mean, how has work from home and new technologies affected your global mobility for your teams?
I think that was my question. I think I come from a little bit of a different situation because in 2018, I left my job in a large outsourcing company, and I had this dream or vision that I wanted to build the world in which people can create video games working from home in their PJs. And that was 2018, and I was like, I'm going to build a company, and everybody can work from wherever they want. And I remember going to all of my clients back then, and I'm like, I'm building this. And they're like, this is a great idea. You will never pass the security process. And I was like, okay, but I'm gonna do it. So in 2018, we started building a company where everybody is remote, all the IT infrastructure is remote, everything is cloud. We obviously run into a lot of different difficulties when it comes to hardware, like setups, all of that stuff. But we also found an amazingly beautiful things, because when the talent that you're looking for is not confined in like a geographical location, but rather is about being the best talent and the best fit for the job, really just open up the world. We could hire from like Brazil and Mexico and Eastern Europe and Asia, all of that stuff, and then we could get actually the best candidate rather than somebody who is available. And back in 2018, where the world wasn't so exposed to international hiring, we could actually get the best cherry picks from different countries. And I was fascinated how amazing the hiring process was. Now we're obviously running in a completely 360. Now that the world is like, oh, I can go to any country and hire anyone I want. We're running into like the salaries in every region going through the roof. And like there's not really as much of the cost savings going in a different country, and then you're running into now your team has so much cultural difference. And I never thought that was a thing, but like I could see, like we have a lot of team in Eastern Europe and we'll have a lot of team in Asia. And for example, the education, like the school education really affects how people, approach certain things. Like Eastern Europe, ex-Soviet Union, very military, very mathematical, very rigid, very process-oriented. Latin America has a lot of passion, like a lot of creative talent. So yeah, I think there's a lot of tools for hiring. Luckily we have, and we also hate Jira, which makes a lot of things easy and complicated simultaneously. But yeah, I think we live in a very lucky time that we can do this.
Absolutely.
I mean, for me, I think the biggest challenge is still, you can solve the communication, you can solve the technology, the back end, the clouds, all those other things. But what we do as an industry, and a lot of entertainment industries, is we make games, which is a highly collaborative, creative process. So the delta that I'm missing is, how do I create a culture for my studio that is hybrid? I've got people who are local, I've got people who are around the world, but then how do I build that kind of tribal connectivity that you would have in a traditional studio where people were used to, water cooler conversations and brainstorming and getting together. And I can be on 50 Zoom meetings, a day, a week, whatever. That doesn't connect me to the teams. That doesn't connect me at a human level. And I think that's what we are trying to figure out how to solve, because I think everything else becomes easier from a technology. There's nothing that, the taxes, all that stuff, you can solve all that stuff, but how do you connect now when everyone has the optionality? And that's also part of retention. Yeah. Like, you want to feel part of a tribe. That's your studio. That's what you're part of. And when you are kind of remote, you don't build those connectivities as easily. It takes much longer and harder to do, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I guess I have a question to that, which is just the idea of retention for senior talent. What impact have you all seen for retention of senior talent because of your global mobility systems?
That sucks. I mean, it's you can be anywhere with anyone with any product out there. Yeah. So, the kind of rule of thumb is, build a place that people want to stay, but not a place they have to stay, right? And so that's what you're trying to do. But again, now that the floodgates have kind of opened up and people have tons of optionality, and you want them to be successful wherever they're at, the challenge, like I said, is how do I create a culture that people just want to be at and continue to want to be at, regardless of what happens out there.
But do you find a difference between your existing employees, well, maybe ones that have been with you for years versus the ones that have joined in the last, 1 to 3 years, in terms of retention?
Yeah, I mean, now you can easily apply for a job online, get hired, zoomed in, and never leave your bedroom within an 8-hour period.
You just change your login.
Yeah, you just change your login. That happened to me. I I stopped one place on a Friday, started a new place on a Monday. I probably should have put up balloons or something just to make it feel interesting.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, do you see at all like opportunities because of the folks wanting to maybe explore a new place in the world, senior talent, because if there's an opening in another studio or there's an opportunity for expansion in a new space, that could be a way to retain that talent that would elsewhere, would just change their login and change someplace. Right. If they could, go live in London for a while, that's, for example, just as a random example. Yeah. So, what are some of the biggest or most common misconceptions that you all see for global mobility systems?
I forget who it was.
I'm happy to take this one. Yeah, I mean, first I fully agree with what you said, and I think yes, the technology part, the logistic part, we're going to figure it out. We've always did. But I think the biggest, talking about misconception, I'd like to call about misconception, pothole, difficulties, things we need to focus on. And I'm going to sound very cheesy here, but I think it's always about human and the people. How do we ensure we have the right culture? I think that there are a few things that we observed. That's not coming from internet or anything like that, but just based on my 2 years of pandemic. Yeah. One is around that we realize that there is really not one size fits all in terms of future of work and mobility policy, right? When we look at the data at the team, we ask people what they want, what they prefer. The answers are pretty different. Every team is different. Some team really need this kinetic energy of being like physically in the same room to perform. Mm-hmm. Other team, they don't really need that, so it's less important. Some people love to work from home. Some people feel isolated and don't like it. So I think it's important to look at project by project and start with, okay, what are we trying to accomplish? What is the best way to move forward for this specific team and also for those specific individuals, right?
Absolutely.
And it's okay to do that in an organic way, right? There are a lot of moving pieces. Usually I'm not a big fan of organic decision. I think sometimes it means that we cannot make a decision, so we say let's make it organic. But I think in this case of mobility, because of all the moving pieces, it's important to say, okay, we believe that this setup is the best for the people and is the best for the game we are delivering. Let's try it out. Let's move forward and be very transparent with the team. And then look at, okay, what is it going? Do we need to pivot? Do we need to calibrate it? And assume that there is a trial and error piece here. Yeah.
If I can add to that, I think I always thought that being an extrovert versus an introvert is just being like an outgoing versus more like I want to keep it to myself. In a few years, I learned that actually extroverts are people whose best ideas come when they're in conversation with somebody else. Yeah. And introverts are people whose best ideas come when they actually have chance to internalize it. And I could see it was like my production lead. I would come and bombard her with ideas, and she'd be like, and then 2 days later she comes in like, hey, I came up with this idea. And I'm like, that was exactly my idea, but she had a time to internalize it. But I think what I would think we would need for global mobility to work to have this hybrid between mostly the creative leaders need the team to talk to them, to come up with the creative ideas about the game and have their feedback, what's going to work, technology-wise, art-wise and stuff like that, versus artists and engineers need their space to actually create it. So if we can find this little bit of a middle ground where both of the forces can meet and create together and then go separate ways to do their own thing, I think we can be in a really good place.
Absolutely. So, for those existing teams, when you're deploying resources in new geographic locations, how have you seen those, affect and improve those current teams? You're pulling new people into a new space. Have you seen, what kind of results have you all seen?
Yeah, I think, for me, have been dealing with outsourcing for the last 10 years in some shape or form. And I think, the long view of it is that there's so much talent in the world, right, that it just helps a lot of studios so that I don't have to I don't have to worry about how am I going to hire 50 people to come to LA who are all senior and specialized and want to live in LA. You know, that's a very specific kind of individual. But I think it's more a matter of how do I find the best group that can satisfy this part of the aspect that I am deficient in. And those people are out there, and all of a sudden it takes a lot of the stress off the organization to simply say, how do we solve everything instead of how do we solve what we're really good at?
Yeah.
And then how do we find those partners out there that complement us as an extension of our studio, not a, you know, throw it over the wall, get it done kind of attitude, but truly as a you know, that hybrid approach of you are part of what we're trying to build and engage with.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a lot in education in certain regions, right? Like Malaysia is really big on animation, Eastern Europe really big in engineering, not really big in animation, for example. And if you're trying to get everything confined in a certain space, you're going to compromise. And and we are devoted, we set up projects where, you know, we would have an art director in LA, an engineering team in Paraguay, an art team in Eastern Europe, a level design in Poland, and then we would set it up so that it all works cohesively, and it works because we get the best talent. And those little things where it's like the time zone issues or anything like that, they actually affect way less than if we were trying to confine it within a certain geographic location.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think the biggest challenge for these studios, though, is are you properly staffing your internal teams to be able to ingest and work with these external partners? I think that when we're talking about like the kind of, you know, I know a lot of executives say, well, I've got, you know, great art directors and they'll just handle well, have they ever worked with outsourcers? Is that actually what they want to do? Do they have the communication skills? Do they have the project management skills? Do they have the support staff to actually work with instead of, you know, and I think that's always going to be a big challenge of have you invested enough to make sure that you can work with external partners, because otherwise the external partners do work and then your team does work and then there's a big disconnect from a communication or operations point of view that you have a tendency to see if that's not there.
Absolutely, you know, I definitely could see that, and you know, having that knowledge sharing between the teams has got to be, you know, and sort of getting the strengths of each to sort of Voltron it to something really super powerful has got to be, I mean, that's compelling for sure. So, I mean, to that, like you're getting a lot of different skill sets, a lot of different backgrounds from different folks. Have you all seen benefits in diversity in your teams because of this? Any examples of that kind of?
I think one of the biggest examples of how the changes, the global mobility has affected external development in the first place. I feel like all the people that work inside of the internal production have finally felt what it is to be on the other side and not to be in a room where it happens. Like, because when you work within a large organization and you can have a conversation by the cooler, or you can just walk into somebody else's pod, or you're walking by and you actually saw what your buddies were working on. When you don't see that, when you don't know that, and you don't have proper documentation, and you can just like have few words, it feels like it could be done because you don't notice that. But then now when everybody had to move from, you know, being in the office to being from home, and you had to build those relationships and build this transfer of information and build this transfer of assets and knowledge and all of that stuff, I felt like the level of documentation, the level of preparation for externalizing thing has gone through the roof. Like I feel like we have been so blessed by how the partners started being prepared. And don't get me wrong, there's always a lot of partners that have done their homework to the highest level. But I feel like it allowed everyone as an industry to step up and actually easily outsource because they already prepped it in a way that they can plug in every other human that is coming in the team remotely. Absolutely. So I think that has been the biggest benefit.
Right on. So what are some major potholes that people should be looking out for in developing global mobility systems?
Yeah, I mentioned one which was like ensure that we are aware that there is no like one size fits all, but there are a few other ones according to me. One is the importance of presence, right? It can be virtual or physical presence, but I think we need to be deliberate about that, right? Especially for a hybrid or fully remote, ensure that, you know, we keep this connection. Some of us are introverted, extroverted, but we're all like Homo sapiens, and connection is super important for most of us, right? So let's be deliberate about that. Like the anti-vision would be that we all become kind of human Slackbot, right? When we have like mechanical interaction about, okay, can you please do this? Yes, it's done. This kind of culture in which the soul of the team is lost. So we need to be deliberate to ensure that on the long term it doesn't happen, right? And there are a few little things we can do, like keep the camera on and those kind of stuff, but also ensure that we have space for like informal conversation, like team building, right? We did some like great escape room virtually, but if we don't do that, if we don't deliberately put an effort on that, I think that little by little the culture can be lost, and the team energy can decrease as well. So that's one I see. There is another one around inclusion that is very important to me, right? So we are now moving to setup in which some people are off-site, some people are on-site, etc. So for instance, if we have a meeting, right, and we have like most of the team that is physically present and 1 or 2 people on Zoom, let's just pay special attention to this person on Zoom. Let's ensure that they can express themselves and they don't lose their voice because of the distance. Because if we don't do that, we're going to create teams within the teams, right? We're going to have, that's the off-site team, that's the on-site team, that's the hybrid team. And we need to be one team, right? And so it's everybody's responsibility, if we decide to go hybrid, to ensure that, okay, it's our common responsibility to ensure that the hybrid model works, if it's hybrid. So that's something very important. And it's easy, in the fire of the project and all that, to forget about that, right? And we will only realize it a few months later, right, when it's a bit late.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because sometimes when there's a meeting that's partially virtual and partially some people are in the office, sometimes there's a chit-chat before the actual meeting. Finally, people join. The meeting ends, and there's still some talk amongst the people who are there. So the people by then on the screen have long gone, and I don't even know if they're aware of what they're missing. Yeah. And so it is a bit weird, and you try to okay, that's right, they're not there. You try to curtail that, but that's really hard. That's a really hard piece to try to make it as equal as possible, right, in terms of information, because information is everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's human interaction. We can't force it, right? Like, if people organize in little cliques, you can't be like, no, we should all be friends. And people are like, yeah, we're all going to go be friends, right? So maybe the solutions are having the pods that are virtual and having the pods that are, non-virtual, and not trying to blend them together. I don't know, just throwing some ideas in.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the key is, from a leadership perspective, you have to take initiative and control of the direction of where you want it to go. And that's probably more so than we've ever had to do in the history. I feel like, like you were kind of talking about, this kind of feels like, like high school, where I never had to study, but I could kind of pass through talent, right at the end of the test. But now it's like you really need to be, progressive and forward-thinking and planning ahead and being prepared and thinking about not the people that speak up, the people who don't speak up. And I think when you talk about losing people, again, people are still leaving for the same reasons they did pre-pandemic, right? Yeah. So it's, were they unhappy? They don't like their job. They don't like their boss, right? No one leaves their job because they're ridiculously happy and overpaid and well compensated, right? It's like, this is too much for me. I'm out of here. They leave for those reasons. If you have a great communication with your studio, and if they leave for the right reasons, thank you, stay in touch, good luck, love what you do, remember me, rock on, that kind of thing, that's never a bad thing. But if they're leaving because, I wish you had thought of me for this role, or I wish, we could have done these other things, those are things that you can change, but you never know the 100% of the things they never tell you, right? So you have to over-communicate, and you really have to do that more so than we ever needed to, because you can't walk by their office and say, you look a little down today. Yeah. And I can see someone who looks a little bit down on Zoom, but they could just be tired.
Yeah, exactly.
But what do? I've got another Zoom call right after that. Yeah. And then another one, and another one. You have to engage with your studio, and that's probably the biggest challenge right now is that, the mobility has created this different influx of necessity of being leaders and kind of HR and psychologists and bartenders and all these other things that we didn't have to do because there was a lot of things that organically overlapped when you're all together. So
it sounds like, I mean, there's a lot of logistical gotchas in putting together these kind of systems. And what are some of the things that y'all have discovered when that information isn't readily available, like on the internet, or it's something that you wish you would have known when these systems were first being put together?
I think I can answer to that because, again, we started a little earlier than everyone into global mobility. So last year, struggling a lot, onboarding people in different time zones, different cultures, different languages, we're this is so overwhelming. And then what we discovered, when they come from a totally different background, totally different location, those locations actually have their own business practices of solving certain problems and how they communicate when they have an issue, all sort of little things. And we're okay, we need to digitalize our whole onboarding. So we bought this license for this company called Thinkific, which is pretty much like a Coursera, but you can customize it to yourself. And we spent 4 months creating lessons and assignments for our team to actually go through the full onboarding, including how do we communicate in Slack? How do we communicate that we have an issue? How do we track things? How do we give each other feedback? What are the principles of receiving feedback and not taking it personal? And even little things, I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys noted, you're in Slack and somebody in a group chat writes, "Hey, I have a problem." And then everybody's sitting in the group channel waiting for that person to type in the rest of what is the problem? And then everybody's pitching in, asking questions. You're no, please don't do that. How do you communicate your problem so that it doesn't create a breakdown in your team? So a lot of we did a lot of different lessons of how we communicate because we have people in Malaysia and Bali and Latin America, Europe, United States. So we tried to unify it, and it really helped smooth the way that people come in because they understand oh, this is why we do those things. And we put a big emphasis on Start With Why. If you guys have read this book, and it's amazing. It's not only giving people what they need to do, but actually giving them the why, so maybe they can come up with even a better idea how to do that for the team. So that was one big thing that we implemented in the team, super successful, and it's ongoing things. Every time we see a breakdown and something not working, we're making another video, uploading it to the system. Also, each department has their own, production has their own training, business development has their own training, HR has their own training, and that actually has been a biggest blessing for us. And then last year we also started this thing called small groups. So we have a people partner, this amazing woman that I met who was a pre-K teacher, so a kindergarten teacher, and I saw her keeping attention of a bunch of kindergartners for an hour on Zoom, and I was you have superpower. I need you. So with her, we started taking her teaching skills and how we could make a playground within the company. So we have a thing called small groups. We have the whole team divided into multiple small pods, and they each meet every week, and they discuss different questions about trust and play games and getting to know each other, learning what is surrender, how not to fight things, and a lot of spiritual, non-spiritual, fun stuff. And I felt we as a team just got to know each other so much more doing those. In the beginning, everybody was so resistant. We're we need to do work. We don't want to do this. This sucks. A few months in, we love Kelsey. Can we do more of those? So having those activities where people can get to know each other, I felt has been the biggest blessing for us. And don't get us wrong, we have a lot of issues, having a cross-cultural team, but we also have a ton of benefits doing that.
So did she say it was easier or harder than kindergarten?
It was, oh my God, she had so much, because like what the kindergartners don't have ego, and when you have a ton of working professionals that feel that they're treated like in a kindergarten, they don't want that. And then like a couple months in, they're like, oh my God, she surrounds us with love. We love love. Can we take more of this? So it definitely worked.
Definitely. So do you all have any other examples you can share of logistical challenges or?
Yeah, some. Before the pandemic, we were in 2 cities. So we were in LA and Bangalore. And then 3 years later, we now have people in over 80 cities.
Wow.
And we only have now 4 offices. So most of those people are not in offices anywhere. But there's kind of clusters. And so because the connection piece is so important, that's what's been for my research to be so critical, especially if somebody's new, and that really needs to be part of their onboarding. Because the connections they make with their colleagues, that's the glue, right? That's going to keep them engaged in their job. Otherwise, it's just a paycheck.
Yeah.
And they're just floating out there. And then the paycheck could be from someone else if it has a bigger number, right? So it's really doing these sort of meet and greets, where we'll assign somebody who schedules like the team lunch, so they all actually get to meet each other. And that's what a lot of the research has shown as well, is that people who work remotely, they do want to connect with other people who, 2 things, 80% want to connect with people who share their same sort of interests or activities. And then 73% want to connect with people just in their same proximity. Right. And that helps, right? It helps kind of like create these bonds.
Absolutely.
Even with people that maybe you wouldn't think are very similar to you. I mean, one of the last real in-person onboardings I did was like 2018. And it's not what's in the onboarding itself per se, right? Sitting at a table and listening to how we, file a proper form for legal review or things like that. It was afterwards at the hotel over a glass of wine. And I'm still in touch with that person.
That's great.
But it's those things that matter. It's sharing part of you, part of your stories, and actually getting to know somebody. That's the glue, however you do it. Those are the important things, really. And that's why I think onboarding is critical, and I don't think anyone's really figured out how to best do it. When you're hiring people all over, different cultures, different people, how do you bring them in, other than, setting them up with a buddy if they have questions and
how
things
do
like
you
that.
do that? How does each of your groups, how do you approach that?
But I mean, for me, I've always said that onboarding is a 1-year process, right? Because the first week, it's deer in headlights. The first month, you're just on waterboarding. Like you're literally just infusing so much, data. First 3 months, you're trying to understand your role. First 6 months, you're trying to understand the company that you're a part of. First 9 months, you're trying to master it. And then after the first year, you might be comfortable with the product, the people, the position that you're in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've seen too many companies where, first week, that's it. Good luck.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, and then they left 6 months later. Wonder why? Right? Because they didn't connect. They didn't feel like there was any kind of ongoing process, because everyone is on their journey on their own, right? And so, especially when you're remote, global mobility. The biggest misconception of mobility is that, oh well, everyone's just working remote. No, global mobility means that you are building a system designed to communicate, drive for clarity, do product development, and you're building that. Have to build that system. It's not just, oh, half my team is working remote. That means you're not building the infrastructure to support that. So for me, the onboarding has to be, longer, especially if you really want people to stay. If you don't, then do what you want.
Actually, yesterday I asked the same question to Sam Carlisle, because in my opinion, if we want to do global mobility where people can plug in easily in the projects, the movie industry is a great example. My husband works in the movie industry. He does production design. The first day he comes on set, he knows exactly what needs to be done. He doesn't need anyone training like him. He doesn't need him to explain any processes. The same for the other 300 people that are on set. Every single person knows exactly what they need to do, where to find it, where do they go, how do they collaborate with each other. Day one. In video games, we need 3 months, 6 months, a year. What are we doing wrong in our education in video games that it takes us a year to plug in a project to be effective? Is there a way for this industry to change, evolve, grow? And I understand that video games is much younger as an industry than movies, but like, what do you guys think could actually make it better, streamline that? What can we do?
I mean, do you think part of that is a function that it's the medium itself? It's a film traditionally is a linear medium, whereas games are a nonlinear medium and are a medium that the consumers are consistently wanting something new and different and evolving, new types of problems, new technologies. I mean, obviously, film has new technologies and new advancements all the time, but it's a different structure that's been, and it has, like to your point, a much longer history. Is there something to the idea that it is a different medium entirely that drives anything of like, why it requires a different kind of structures, because you need to build a new system almost with each processes,
But do we?
Right.
No, go ahead.
No, I think it's that, right? If you look at the evolution of film and video games for the last 40 years, like
Yes.
40 or 50 years ago, it was like Pong, in the 70s, and now look at where we are compared to film, who has evolved as well, but maybe less fast.
Yes.
So, I think that's the key of the explanation. It feels that it's constantly changing. Right now, we're like focusing on live service, which is something that didn't exist a few years ago, right? So,
Absolutely.
it's harder to adapt, I think.
Yeah. What do you think, Dan? You're definitely hard at thought on that.
Come back, Dan.
I mean, for me, there's a ton of similarities in terms of TV, film, and games from a creative aspect. I think that TV and film, though, have the benefit of, they do a lot of that kind of pre-production. They really, you don't spend a dime in production until you know what the kind of script is, right?
That's a good point.
And people are going to argue, but I've seen people rewrite the scripts and constantly. I said, yeah, but that's not how they sold it. Like when they sold it, the script was done, to a certain degree. And so when the tradesmen, like your husband, come in, they know exactly what their role is and the expectation of that role. The problem, I think, with gaming is there is so much kind of flexibility on a per role basis. Not every senior engineer is a senior engineer, right? And every concept artist is capable of the same kind of concept art, right? Not every, producer is any good. There's so many varying levels to these skill sets.
Well, even our nomenclature from studio to studio is very
so different.
Yeah.
Everyone has, but I think you could plug into almost any different kind of film crew, know what the role is, and be able to do the role, depending on your field, right?
So do we need to have a more defined roles in video game industry, or
just more sharing in terms of best practices? I think that's always the challenge. I mean, our industry just sucks when it comes to like sharing best practices. It's like some sort of secret magic sauce that we're all, that no one wants to know what Colonel Sanders' recipe is, and instead of like making the entire industry better, we're thinking, I'm going to hold on to my secret ideas and how I do things better, and neater. I'm not going to share it with you.
We're still young, though, as an industry. I think we're getting better.
You are. I'm not.
No, I don't know about that. No, I mean, you look at the, I think we're still in the nascent days of things. And,
for sure.
It's, I think we're nearly out of time, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions from folks. So any last-minute tips or tricks you can give, any things you can share that might help people that are trying to start a system?
Wow, where to start with that one?
Yeah.
I mean, definitely, like Mark said, no size fits all. I mean, you have to really look at what you're trying to accomplish, and especially if there's a diversity component, that's good to set up early on, so that when you're looking at moving people around, that at least is a focus for you, right? Because you can definitely improve diversity through global mobility. What are some of the pitfalls?
No, it's the same for everything as well. I think another thing is that, like in everything in business, for mobility, when we make a decision, let's ensure it works on the long term as well. And I think with the pressure of the pandemic, that sometimes we can be in a situation where, we need to solve this problem now, let's quickly hire someone, even if there is a 12 hours time difference. And I had to take unpopular decision at this time because I knew it was going to work on the short term, but then what do we do after, right? Are we sure that all the stakeholders are fine with it? So I think that's also something to keep in mind. And the same for individuals, right? We talked a year ago about like the great resignations, right? A lot of people, moved, and some people like made the right choices. But now you look new kind of articles around like the great regret, right? And so like those like 2 weeks, 4 people reach out to me to tell me, so I regret my choice, and like in my personal and professional life. And it's because they made the decision. What triggered the decision was the wrong thing, right? It was the mobility or the short gain, short time gain. It can be a reason, but it cannot be the reason, right? And I think that's super important to keep in mind, right? Always, take this step back. Say, why actually are we making this decision, right? Yes, it's great. There is mobility. There is this. There is that. But is it something I'm passionate about, really, truly? And if it's not the case, it's better to not move too much.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of disagreement in terms of like remote work. Is it really just sort of a holdover from the pandemic? Is it eventually just going to go away? Has it gone down since the COVID mandates went away? Are people really going to go back in the office? Like, there's so much talk still, and it's not. You usually hear it very binary, right? Either people work in the office or they work remotely. There's not a lot of in-between stuff. But I don't think anyone really knows yet what's going to happen. I mean, there's a lot of conversations about all of that. But it's funny because what we do know is a lot of people thought, oh, remote work, it's going to calm down with the COVID mandates going away. People can come back in. And the research from McKinsey shows that it's actually gone up 240% since 2021, remote work. So I don't think it's going away, but it's not for everyone either. Right? So again, I don't think there is one size fits all anything.
No.
And if Apple and Google can't figure out what the right thing to do is, we're all screwed.
Yeah, there's some pretty smart folks there.
Yeah, there are smart folks, and they've tried. They keep flip-flopping. And I think we're going to keep seeing that. People think, okay, now it's better, productivity will be better, mental health issues, let's bring people back. And then that doesn't work, and they go back and forth.
Absolutely. Dan, no?
Ladies first.
I think the biggest emphasis that I see that needs to be done for us specifically, I don't know whether that would translate to you guys, but integration of the processes, because through pandemic, through working remote, we're realizing that a lot of things that used to work are not working in the current setup with current culture, certain logistics aspects. And we come up with like, okay, let's do this. And we're like, cool, we announced to everybody, but then we're like, just experiencing hiccups, and we're like, wait, but we agreed that we're going to do that, but we actually realized we didn't give it time and proper integration and receiving feedback and tuning a little bit here and there. So I feel like one of the biggest, adventures for us is to fine-tune the integration process of the processes, and then if we master that, we're going to be golden.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'm going to add to that is, I used to say that, I don't care about butts and seats. I care about results. And so I didn't care if people were remote or not. And then I realized that was still wrong. And so what I actually truly care about is behavior, right? Because if you only focus on the results, you can get the result you want, but you can burn out your team and you can have the culture that you don't want. So what I care about is, the behavior of the studio that I have as the most important thing, because then, as I say, then I find that the results take care of themselves.
Absolutely. So I think we have a little bit of time for questions. I have I'm going to be handed here a stuffed salt shaker.
Gotcha.
All right. This really is a microphone. I thought this was a joke. You have to hold it up like this. So let's see if I can. Ooh.
Yeah, I have a question based on has being in a remote scenario, I mean, if you're fully 100% remote, how does that affect your travel budgets? Are you having to have to travel more to have more connective tissue? Like, is that the substitute instead of having an actual central location where everyone kind of goes in? Or is there a compare? I know it's a tough, challenging question, but.
I worked remotely for a couple of years. It didn't really impact my travel schedule because it was during the pandemic when people couldn't really move around unless you were already in the Schengen zone, and then you could take trains. But it didn't really impact my work. And luckily it was a company I'd already been working for a year and a half. So it might have been a little bit different in that regard.
Yeah, I think one thing that happened as well is that even if things might change, right? Once again, a lot of moving pieces, is that we realized that it was easier than we thought to work on Zoom, right? So, so to reduce a little bit the amount of travel seems like a possibility, right? Time will tell. But it seems that some things that we were doing like in person are not 100% needed anymore. So I see opportunities there.
We actually do gatherings in the locations where we have tighter population of the team members. Last year, I'm Ukrainian, so I get a chance before the war to travel there, and we have quite a few team members from different cities there. So we brought them in one location, and we actually rented Olympic-sized boats and did a racing on the river, and it was the most fantastic amount of fun, just getting to know each other and spending time together. And I felt that created a much bigger bonding. And like I have. With my leadership team in the company, I try to fly them in one location for at least a week every year, so we get to have a planning session. And sometimes different leads in a company don't get along, but then they put them in one location. They're like best buddies all of a sudden after 3 glasses or bottles of wine. So I definitely think that putting people in one room, especially if there's key team members, it is vital to have those sessions, to have those meetings so people can resolve, and not just having a CEO be like, you guys should be friends. Yeah. And that's it. But there's a lot of companies that do at least quarterly meetup where they fly the whole, and they use the budget that they used to have for the office to fly everyone for at least a weekend in one location. Literally, it was a few weeks ago in an elevator with people who were working at a company like that, and they were like, the best thing. They get to travel in different locations, and they don't want to leave this company.
Retention.
Psionics, right? They used to do every year. They would fly the whole team to Hawaii to celebrate the holidays. I'm not sure they're doing it. I just feel here. I don't know whether they're doing it right now, but before pandemic, they used to do that.
I haven't heard of any companies that take the time and investment to get people into one space to spend time together where it doesn't work out.
Oh yeah.
It's just super productive, and it is so nice, and I think if you think you don't like someone, or people aren't getting along, again, having them spend time together and realize they're both just people seems to fix a lot of things. And I think it's because when you spend time with people too, you tend to trust them. And that's what's sometimes missing. So people misinterpret things sometimes on email in a certain way, but fundamentally I think it comes down to trust.
Well, we had a lot of a budget that was left over from trade shows and other things that we didn't utilize, that we were able to apply to things like that to get people together during the pandemic. When it made sense and it was safe for everyone. So
I think the gentleman had a question right there.
He doesn't have.
That's a big throw.
Chuck it. Chuck it.
Throw it.
give him the conch.
Oh, good catch.
Have you thought about playing for the Mariners?
Hello? Oh, yeah, there we go. It's working. So, thank you for the wonderful talk today. It's really insightful. But there's sometimes in the world, things bad happen at certain locations of the world. And they're sometimes unplanned. How, in your opinion, how do you go over such things that are related to remote work if, per se, a country has had an unfortunate event happen to them?
Like a war.
Like a war, exactly.
As I said, I am Ukrainian. This year has been one of the most challenging years of my life and career, although in 2000, I'm Crimean as well, and back at the company I used to work before in 2014, while I was at GDC, Russia invaded Crimea. So we had an office of 70 people, and it was a lot of things that had to happen. And this year I had 13 team members with their families. It was around 40 people that we just had to figure out how we relocate them, how we move their computers. Literally, they started bombing at 5 a.m. By 7 a.m., my art director, a few other people just drove by. My operation lead got the money. I'm like, get out, get to the border. There's a lot of logistics involved, setting up, look like a hotel that we booked for the whole team, for their families, some extra lodging, and literally people were up and running, working in 3 days.
Yeah.
Because and it wasn't like we were like, take all the time you want, just focus on you. And they were like, we need a sense of normality.
Yeah.
We want to get back to work. This is something that allows us to get connected to the world where things seem a little bit normal. And I'm not going to go in details, but there's, you have to react fast. I guess that's the only thing. They're not going to teach you in an MBA course or any other course what to do when your unfriendly neighbor decides to invade your country. So,
Now, was that, do you think that was predominantly a function of just reacting nimbly, or do you think that was a function of having proper disaster preparedness plans in place, you know?
Nobody was prepared.
No one's really prepared. I mean, I don't know if you could, like some groups
can't.
have different plans to be able to, in different regions, to be able to sort of get out of Dodge quick.
I don't think when you can prepare for that, when people call you and they cry. Like my little brother was in Kiev when all of this happened. I live in Los Angeles. I was like on the other side of the world, but I didn't sleep for like a few days. You just deal with like, you know, people getting drafted to army that work with you, and you're trying to like, what are you doing in this moment? Like, do you have any disaster plan? What do you do when your lead animator is being drafted to army? Like, but I honestly, it's such an amazing thanks to my team, because we were able to move the work that we had in a Ukrainian pod to the rest of the European team, to Latin America, and people had to work a little bit longer than they would normally work, but they were like, yeah, it wasn't like a mandate from the company in no shape or form. People were just like, we need to help our colleagues. We need to figure it out as a team. And I feel like as a team, we came out so much stronger. The relationships in the team, like I would not want a situation like that to happen to make a better relationship in the team. But
It's kind of the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe there's somebody's a better planner for a war.
No, I mean, I think you understand the DNA of a company when something like that happens.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah, at least or what they care about, what their values
they
really
prioritize,
are.
you know, logistics, they figure it out, they get it done because they understand what is important to them, which is their people. And so they just figure it out, you know. So.
But there also are organizations that deal with things just like that. That's ISOS is one of them. They're known for going in and getting your people out. So it's not just companies that have to do that themselves. There are at least some resources. Luckily.
That's great to know.
Yeah.
I hope I would not need that, but I'm going to write this one down.
So, I think we've got a few. Somebody passed the conch.
He's closer to me.
Safe.
So, hello, I'm Xavier. I'm from Focus, a French publisher. I think that we all agree that remote work and at least partial remote work is the sense of history, and it's going to be happen more and more. I think that we also all agree that being together in the same space, in the same physical space, is something good for energy, for creation. And so can I don't want to be naive, can I assume as a publisher that in the next months, year, the cost of making a game is just going to rise up because of remote work? What do you think?
So if I understand the question, it's do we feel as though the cost of remote work is going to increase the cost of business?
Yeah, globally, if there is more and more remote working, it's going to affect the cost of making a game. I mean, making the same game 2 years ago before remote work and making the same game today with remote working is going just to cost more because people are no more just together in the same space. And yeah, we are going to lose a bit of energy and productivity, and losing all this that makes also a game happen faster.
Question for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me, it's less about the remote work and the talent pool that you're kind of talking about. I think you also have to factor in that the same talent pool that covers games is now being poached from Netflix and movies and streaming and all these other places, and that pool hasn't grown. I mean, I remember the original development group was just focused on PC and consoles, and then mobile happened, and that pulled a bunch of developers. And then, you know, hyper casual and free to play, and you know, all these, we're all fighting for the same kind of talent. And now remote has just made it even easier or more accessible for everyone. So that's really kind of the challenge, I think, you know, from my point of view, of that will raise the cost because supply and demand.
Yeah. The war of talent is very real.
Very real.
Very
It's a
real.
separate panel that we'll have.
I think we have a couple
Oh, sorry,
more.
in the back.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
It's a long way to go.
Oh, that's a
Do it.
scary one.
Let's see. Can you do it?
Come on, come on. See if it goes. Come on. Like,
Have you ever thought about playing for the Mariners?
Yeah, you mentioned Thomas, my name. So you mentioned before behavior you would rather look at than
Oh, don't pick on me.
than you know, like output or results. Of course, that is a tricky question. Like, how do you track or encourage a certain behavior rather than, you know, just letting everyone go, hope for the best? You know, what's some of the things that you do there?
Yeah, I mean, you know, for me, behavior that I'm looking for is you know, accountability. You know, there has to be a sense of ownership, strong communication. You know, a need for clarity. You know, these are all kind of things that you can kind of track through, you know, project management tools, and how often are they checking into P1? You know, how often are they doing their tasks compared to their compatriots, and all these other things. And, you know, at the end of the day, you know, those are the kind of the behaviors of a professional that you would expect. And then, you know, on top of that, you want to layer on your culture of, like, is this person, you know, a strong communicator? Do they actually want to help their colleagues? And you see that behavior, and it's reinforced. And it's not that you see it directly, but you hear it from their colleagues. That's the kind of behavior that I kind of look for. Is I love hearing about other people helping other people in my studio, because for me, that's the data that I'm looking for, that the behavior is at least working in the right direction. Collaborative, yeah, collaboration.
Absolutely.
Hope that helps answer vaguely.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, some things you can track in numbers. Others, like soft factors, are much harder to hear from throughout your organization.
Yeah, but that's my point, is that, you know, that's something that I strongly believe in. So I've kind of, like, I got my leadership team believing into that as well. So those are things that they look for. It can't be just me. Like, if I'm the only one looking for behavior, that's not going to be very effective. I need to kind of reinforce that behavior to my leadership team so that they reinforce it to their teams, and that then we hire the right people, and that we train the right people the right way. And then that's how you kind of, but you have to be diligent, you have to be proactive, and you have to say, like, every month we're going to talk about this. Every month we're going to prioritize this as a company versus other things that you can prioritize. And that's just part of that culture that you're trying to drive.
Yeah, to be clear about your values.
Yeah.
Right. So that they know what is important, and they do that themselves. Yeah.
Otherwise, you let the values.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one quick one.
Yeah.
Nice, everyone's
Nice.
Wow.
These guys can all throw.
impressive.
I played football one time, a long time ago.
I played Madden too.
We should try to do this after happy hour.
Yeah.
Though. This is too easy for them.
Yeah.
So first, everyone up there, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. This was
Absolutely.
very helpful. I actually used to work in the film industry, so this was a really good segue now that I'm working in the gaming industry. I wanted to propose something, or maybe suggest something, or maybe just ask, has this been thought of? I normally see in the film industry that we have it's like, there's a time that we start and there's a time that we stop, right? So it's like, hey, we're done with this. This is the product and it's released, unless it's like a remake of, I don't know, Justice League or something like that. We have another director coming in and doing his cut. In the gaming industry, it's not like that. It's more so like an update, ongoing, kind of forever.
Yeah, live ops.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, as we continue to explore, you know, we use the film industry always as kind of like this model that we'd like to ascend to. Everybody goes in, knows their thing. It's kind of like boop, 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 boop with small adjustments. I'm wondering, have we, or do we think that in the next, I don't know, 5 years, because everyone kind of knows their role. I think it's more so about the trust and knowing that that person's going to perform their role and have those checks and balances. Have we discovered, or are we starting to discover, what those checks and balances would be to eventually in the next 5 or 10 years as a culture of gaming to say, oh, I know this person's going to do it. Like, for instance, a PA in the film industry knows automatically, this is my job. When this is done, this is the trigger for me to go to this person and say X, Y, and Z, and it's very seamless. So I'm wondering, and as you guys are, as you all are very proficient in what you do you see a plan of saying, hey, in the next 5 years, I'm going to start integrating this idea of trust to this department to where we can have like a very clean checkpoint to move to the next phase? I hope that made sense.
I'm going to give a quick answer on that because I've been thinking a lot about this issue, and I feel it's all lays in the education, because the majority of people who work in video games nowadays do not have a video games education per se, and therefore, and also there's no standard video game education. So we've been talking to quite a few art schools to, in addition to their regular curriculum of the art itself, to introduce the professional boot camps, to make sure that the artists that come out of those schools know how to track their time in Jira, how to assign the tickets to their peers, like that they have to give it to review for their lead after this stage, and this is where the documents should be, and this is the standards for preparing the documents, and all of this stuff, because every time you look at the document that is new and doesn't have the same format that you're used to, you're like, wait, what is this? So I feel like if there would be more initiatives on the global level to standardize the education, especially in terms of processes, I think we as an industry could be in a much better place.
I think it would be amazing. Lastly, I think that's a great idea, and maybe something that the community here also could maybe brainstorm. Maybe there's so many platforms that we can all kind of come together with, that we do even in our free time, that if we start this conversation just coming from film, if we begin to start this conversation and getting the education and making it a standardized practice, even if it's like, hey, yeah, we do this at our company, but at an ad hoc perspective, we would like these things to kind of move in this direction. Like, hey, we do this way, but when we interact with outsourcing or a third party or whatever, it's a standard that we do blah, 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 blah. And I think if we continue to do conferences like this, XDS, on our own merit or in our platforms that we just divulge in naturally, I think we'll start to see a change. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, and I just wanted to say a huge thank you to the panelists. It was amazing talking with you all. Please, round of applause for everyone here.